Imagine boarding a flight, settling into your seat, and never being seen again. Not just you, but everyone on board. The plane, the passengers, the whole crew, all vanishing without a trace. No wreckage, no bodies, no answers. It sounds impossible, right? But it's happened more times than you think. Today, we're diving into some of the most disturbing aircraft disappearances in history. Stories that governments try to hide. Stories that will make you think twice before your next flight. These are the planes that vanished. And what happened to them is more terrifying than you can imagine. Welcome to Stories Lost Forever. Santiago Flight 513, The Time Traveler. September 4th, 1954. Santiago Airlines Flight 513 prepares for departure from Aachen, West Germany. It's a routine transatlantic flight to Porto Alegre, Brazil. On board are 92 passengers and crew members, excited to reach their destination. The aircraft, a Lockheed Super Constellation, was one of the most advanced planes of its time. Reliable, safe, trusted. The flight takes off without incident. Everything is normal. The plane climbs to cruising altitude. The crew radios their position. Weather conditions are good. Visibility is clear. Hours pass. The plane maintains steady contact with ground control as it crosses the Atlantic Ocean. And then, somewhere over the Atlantic, something happens. The radio goes silent. Ground control tries to make contact. Nothing. They try again. Still nothing. Minutes turn into hours. The plane has vanished. Search and rescue operations are launched immediately. Ships scour the Atlantic. Aircraft search the flight path. Days turn into weeks. No wreckage is found. No oil slicks. No debris floating in the water. No bodies. It's as if Santiago Flight 513 simply ceased to exist. The families of the 92 people on board are devastated. Airlines are baffled. Aviation experts have no explanation. The official report lists the cause as unknown. The case goes cold. Years pass. 2 decades. 3 decades. The families grieve. The world moves on. Santiago Flight 513 becomes a footnote in aviation history, just another unexplained disappearance. Until October 12, 1989, 35 years after it vanished, a ground crew worker at Porto Alegre Airport in Brazil is performing a routine inspection of the airport grounds when he notices something strange in a remote area of the airfield. It's an old aircraft, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. That's odd. There are no old planes scheduled to be stored in this area. He moves closer to investigate. As he approaches, his blood runs cold. It's a Lockheed Super Constellation, the same model as Santiago Flight 513. But that's impossible. That plane disappeared 35 years ago. He radios for help. Within minutes, airport security and officials arrive. They examine the aircraft. The registration number matches. It's Santiago Flight 513. The plane that vanished in 1954 has somehow appeared at its original destination in 1989. But it gets worse. Much worse. The officials cautiously approach the aircraft. The door is closed but not locked. They open it and step inside. The smell hits them immediately. Death. The interior of the plane is a time capsule. The seats, the decor, everything is from 1954. And sitting in those seats are the passengers. All 92 of them dead. Skeletons still strapped into their seats, still wearing their 1950s clothing, still holding newspapers from September 1954. The crew is at the controls. The captain's skeletal hands are still on the yoke. The co-pilot's remains are slumped in his seat. A flight attendant's skeleton is in the aisle, as if she had been serving passengers when whatever happened, happened. But here's what makes no sense. There's no sign of a crash. No damage to the aircraft. The plane landed perfectly, or appeared to have landed perfectly. The landing gear is down. The engines are off. It's as if the plane simply touched down and everyone on board died instantly. The Brazilian authorities immediately seal off the area. They remove the bodies, or what's left of them. They begin an investigation. And then suddenly the investigation stops. The wreckage is removed. The story is suppressed. The Brazilian government refuses to comment. Journalists who try to investigate are stonewalled. Documents are classified. Witnesses are told to keep quiet. Why? What do they find on that plane? What happened to Santiago Flight 513 during those 35 missing years? And why did the government cover it up? Theories exploded. Some said it was a time warp, that the plane had slipped through some kind of temporal anomaly and arrived 35 years late. Others claimed it was a government experiment gone wrong, that the plane had been used to test secret technology. Paranormal investigators suggested the plane had entered another dimension and somehow returned. Skeptics said the whole story was a hoax, that no such flight ever existed. But here's what we know for certain. Aviation records from 1954 confirmed that a transatlantic flight did go missing around that date. Families did lose loved ones. And in 1989, something was found at Porto Alegre Airport that caused the Brazilian government to launch a classified investigation. Whether it was actually Santiago Flight 513 or something else entirely remains a mystery. But one thing is clear. Someone doesn't want us to know the truth. What makes these disappearances so disturbing? You might be thinking, planes crash. It's tragic, but it happens. So what makes these disappearances different? Let me explain. When a plane crashes, it leaves evidence. Wreckage, debris fields, oil slicks, black boxes, bodies. Even when a plane crashes into the ocean, we find something. Air France Flight 447 crashed into the Atlantic in 2009. It took 2 years, but they found the wreckage and recovered the black boxes from the bottom of the ocean. When Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down over Ukraine in 2014, the debris field was immediately located. We know what happened. But the planes we're talking about today left nothing. No distress calls. No emergency signals. No wreckage. They simply vanished from radar and were never seen again. That's not how physics works. That's not how reality works. A 50-ton aircraft doesn't just disappear. But these did. And it's not just 1 or 2 incidents. There are dozens of documented cases of aircraft vanishing without explanation. The Bermuda Triangle alone has claimed over 50 planes and ships. Flight 19, a group of 5 U.S. Navy bombers, disappeared in 1945. The search planes sent to find them also vanished. 6 aircraft, 27 men, gone. What makes investigators lose sleep is the lack of logic. Modern aircraft have redundant systems, multiple radios, transponders, GPS emergency locator beacons, black boxes designed to survive impacts and transmit signals for 30 days. Yet planes still vanish. How? In an age where we could track a stolen iPhone anywhere on Earth, how do we lose a Boeing 777? The answer, according to some experts, is that we're not just dealing with mechanical failures or bad weather. We're dealing with something else. Something that doesn't follow the rules. Real quick, if you're enjoying these lost stories, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps other people find these videos. And if you want more stories like this every week, subscribe to Stories Lost Forever and turn on notifications. The Brazilian government cover-up. Let's go back to Santiago Flight 513 and the alleged cover-up. Why would the Brazilian government suppress information about a plane that reappeared 35 years after vanishing? What could possibly be on that aircraft that warranted classification? According to leaked reports and testimonies from former officials, what they found on that plane defied everything we know about physics and reality. First, the bodies. Forensic examinations reportedly showed that the passengers and crew had been dead for approximately 35 years. Carbon dating of the organic material, the newspapers, even the food in the galley, all pointed to 1954. But here's the problem. The plane showed no signs of being in storage or hidden for 35 years. There was no dust buildup. No corrosion beyond what you'd expect from a single flight. The fuel tanks still had fuel in them. The tires weren't flat. It was as if the plane had been in flight right up until the moment it was found. Second, the instruments. According to one leaked report, the cockpit instruments were still functional and showed something impossible. The altimeter indicated the plane was at 35,000 feet. The airspeed indicator showed 400 knots. But the plane was sitting on the ground. The instruments were reading as if the plane was still in flight, even though it clearly wasn't. Technicians couldn't explain it. Third, and this is where it gets truly bizarre, the clocks. Every clock on the plane, from the cockpit chronometers to passengers' wristwatches, had stopped at the exact same time, 9:55 a.m. But here's the disturbing part. When investigators checked what time it was when the plane was discovered, it was 9:55 a.m. The same time, down to the minute. 35 years apart, but the same exact time. The Brazilian military took over the investigation within 48 hours of the discovery. They classified everything. They removed all evidence from the airport. Witnesses were interviewed and told not to speak publicly. Journalists who tried to investigate were threatened with prosecution under national security laws. Why such extreme measures for a simple aircraft accident? Some former officials, speaking anonymously years later, claimed the government believed the plane had encountered some kind of temporal anomaly, a rift in space-time that caused it to skip forward 35 years. Sounds like science fiction, right? But Einstein proved that time is relative. We know that time dilation is real. Astronauts on the International Space Station age slightly slower than people on Earth. It's measurable. So is it really impossible that under certain conditions, extreme conditions, time could behave in unexpected ways? Others suggested a more sinister explanation. They claimed the plane had been intercepted by a foreign military during the Cold War, that the passengers had been experimented on, and that the plane was later planted at the airport to hide the truth. But this theory has problems. How would a foreign military keep a stolen plane hidden for 35 years? And why return it? The most unsettling theory comes from physicist Dr. Eduardo Hernandez, who was reportedly consulted by the Brazilian government during the investigation. According to leaked documents, Dr. Hernandez proposed that the plane had entered a region of space where the normal flow of time was disrupted. He theorized that certain atmospheric conditions, combined with electromagnetic anomalies, could create what he called a temporal bubble. Inside this bubble, time would move differently than the outside world. To the passengers and crew, the flight might have felt like minutes. To the outside world, 35 years passed. Dr. Hernandez allegedly recommended further study, but the government shut down the investigation and classified his findings. Dr. Hernandez himself refused to comment publicly and died in 1997. His research papers on the incident have never been released. So what really happened? We may never know. The Brazilian government maintains that no such incident occurred. They claim Santiago Flight 513 never existed, that it's an urban legend. But families who lost loved ones in 1954 know otherwise. They have death certificates. They have records. And some of them claim that in 1989, they were contacted by Brazilian officials asking strange questions about their deceased relatives. Why would the government contact families of people who supposedly never existed? The stolen Boeing, Flight 727. Now let's talk about a different kind of disappearance. A plane that didn't vanish in the sky, but was stolen right off the ground and never seen again. May 25, 2003. 4 de Fevereiro Airport in Luanda, Angola. A Boeing 727 sits on the tarmac. The plane is owned by an American company, but it's been sitting in Luanda for months, racking up airport fees and maintenance costs. It's become a problem. On board the plane that day are two men. Ben Charles Padilla, an American aircraft mechanic and flight engineer, and Jean Matantu, a Congolese mechanic. They're supposedly performing maintenance and preparing the plane for a ferry flight back to the United States. Security cameras show them entering the aircraft around 5 p.m. local time. Nothing unusual. Just two mechanics doing their job. Then, at approximately 5:30 p.m., something strange happens. The Boeing 727's engines start. But here's the first problem. Ben Padilla is a flight engineer, not a pilot. He's not certified to fly a 727. In fact, a 727 requires a minimum of 3 crew members to operate: a pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer. It's not a plane you can fly solo. The systems are too complex. Yet someone is starting those engines. Air traffic control at Luanda notices the plane's engines running and tries to make radio contact. No response. They try again. Still no response. Then, before anyone can react, the Boeing 727 begins to move. It taxis toward the runway without clearance, without filing a flight plan, without any communication. Air traffic controllers are in a panic. They're ordering the plane to stop. The plane ignores them. The 727 reaches the runway, doesn't bother to line up properly, and begins its takeoff roll. It accelerates down the runway, angled incorrectly, and lifts off. The takeoff is sloppy, dangerous, exactly what you'd expect from someone who doesn't know how to fly a plane that size. The aircraft climbs, banks to the southwest, and disappears from radar. The transponder is off. The lights are off. It's gone. Within minutes, air traffic control alerts Angolan military authorities. Within hours, the U.S. government is notified. The FBI launches an investigation. The CIA gets involved. Why? Because in 2003, just 2 years after September 11th, a stolen Boeing 727 is a potential weapon. This plane could be flown into a building, a stadium, a city. It's every counterterrorism agency's nightmare. A massive search begins. Satellites scan Africa. Radar stations across the continent are alerted. Interpol issues a global notice. The U.S. Air Force monitors the skies. Every airport, every airstrip, every possible landing site is checked. And they find nothing. The plane has vanished. Weeks pass. Months pass. No wreckage is found. No demands are made. No terrorist attack occurs. The Boeing 727, registration number November 844 Alpha Alpha, is never seen again. 2 men and a 200,000-pound aircraft have disappeared without a trace. So what happened? Theories abound. Some believe Ben Padilla and John Matanta stole the plane intentionally, planning to sell it on a black market. Boeing 727s, even old ones, are worth millions. Parts alone could fetch hundreds of thousands of dollars. But this theory has problems. Where did they land? A 727 needs a runway at least 6,000 feet long. You can't just hide a plane that size. And neither man had the skills to fly it. A darker theory suggests the plane was stolen by a criminal organization or even a rogue government. Perhaps Padilla and Matanta were coerced or tricked into helping. The plane could have been repainted, given a new registration, and flown to a remote location where it was dismantled or repurposed. This would explain why it was never found. But it raises more questions. Who would go through such effort? And why? The most disturbing theory comes from intelligence sources who suggest the plane may have been intended for a terrorist attack that was either called off or failed. According to this theory, Padilla and Matanta were duped into helping hijackers, who then took control of the plane. The plan was to fly it into a target, but something went wrong. Perhaps the hijackers couldn't fly the plane properly. Perhaps they were intercepted by military aircraft and shot down over the ocean, with governments keeping it quiet to avoid panic. If this is true, the wreckage would have been deliberately hidden. Ben Padilla's family insists he would never steal a plane or help terrorists. They describe him as an honest, hard-working man who loved aviation. His sister told reporters that Ben had called her the day before the plane vanished, saying he was excited to finally get the 727 back to the U.S. He sounded happy, not stressed or afraid. She doesn't believe he stole the plane. She believes something happened to him. John Matanta's background is murkier. Little is known about him. Some reports suggest he had ties to questionable individuals in the Angolan underworld. Others say he was just a mechanic trying to make a living. His fate, like Padilla's, remains unknown. In 2008, 5 years after the disappearance, the FBI officially closed the case, stating they had no leads and no evidence of terrorism. The plane was written off as lost. Insurance companies paid out. The families of Padilla and Matanta held memorial services, accepting that their loved ones were likely dead. But here's what keeps investigators awake at night. A Boeing 727 requires regular maintenance. The one that vanished in 2003 had been sitting in Luanda for months with minimal upkeep. It shouldn't have been able to fly very far. Yet it took off and vanished completely. If it crashed, we should have found it. If it landed, someone should have seen it. The fact that we found nothing suggests something far stranger than a simple theft or crash. It suggests the plane went somewhere we haven't thought to look, or somewhere we can't look. So what connects these planes? Is there a pattern? Aviation experts have been studying this question for decades, and what they've found is both fascinating and terrifying. First, geography. A disproportionate number of aircraft disappearances occur in specific regions of the world. The Bermuda Triangle is famous, but there's also the Devil's Sea near Japan the Bay Strait between Australia and Tasmania, and certain regions of the South Atlantic. These areas have higher than average incidents of vanishing aircraft and ships. Why? Some scientists point to magnetic anomalies. Others cite unusual weather patterns. A few suggest something we don't yet understand about the fabric of space-time in these locations. Second, timing. Many disappearances occur during periods of high solar activity. Coronal mass ejections, solar flares, and geomagnetic storms have been linked to communication failures and navigational errors. Could intense electromagnetic radiation from the sun somehow contribute to these vanishings? Some physicists think it's possible. Third, technology failures. In almost every case, multiple systems fail simultaneously. Radios stop working. Transponders go offline. GPS fails. It's as if something is interfering with all electronic systems at once. This is extremely rare under normal circumstances. Modern aircraft have redundant systems specifically to prevent total failure. Yet it happens. Fourth, and most disturbing, the lack of distress signals. Pilots are trained to communicate problems immediately. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Even in the worst crashes, pilots usually have time to send a mayday call. But in these disappearances, there's nothing. Radio silence. It's as if the planes and everyone on board are simply erased from existence in an instant. Were we dealing with natural phenomena we don't understand? Secret military technology? Something else entirely? The truth is, we don't know. And that's what makes these stories so terrifying. Every year, millions of flights take off safely and land without incident. Air travel is statistically the safest form of transportation. But every now and then, a plane vanishes, and we're left with questions that have no answers. Where did Santiago Flight 513 go for 35 years? What did the Brazilian government find that they needed to cover up? What happened to Ben Padilla and John Mutanto? Where is that Boeing 727? And how many other aircraft have disappeared that we don't even know about? The families of those lost deserve answers. The aviation industry deserves to understand what's happening. But some mysteries, it seems, are never meant to be solved. Some stories are lost forever. This was the story of the planes that vanished. If you want more mysteries like this, subscribe to Stories Lost Forever and turn on notifications, because these stories deserve to be remembered. And maybe, just maybe, one day we'll find out what really happened to them.